Catholic world is getting ready for the funeral of Pope Francis tomorrow. It begins at 10 o'clock in the morning Roman time, 4 o'clock Eastern, and 1 a.m. Pacific time. Certain high-profile attendees may also have other things on their minds. A bunch of world leaders will be attending to pay respects, but they could also find themselves involved in other things. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, of course, obviously will be there. She's, the host country, basically. I mean, the Vatican is a country, but kind of like a sliver of a country. And many of her fellow Western leaders will attend, including French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, never to miss any photo op, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and U.S. President Donald Trump, also not one to miss any photo opportunities. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos II, who leads the most Catholic country in Asia, will also be there. Argentine President Javier Milei, former adversary of Pope Francis, but also a fellow Argentine, and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva will be there as well. Trump seems to be a major object of interest for other world leaders. Zelensky said he'd like to talk in a little side meeting to Trump. Gee, I wonder what he'd be asking about. Maybe, he's
seems inappropriate.
He's asking for some kind of recipe for Melania for something.
Yes.
And EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen might also get to meet Trump for the first time since he began his second term. If Meloni gets his way, he wants that to happen. There's not going to be, this is going to be a hit it and quit it meeting. Trump is only going to be in Rome under 24 hours. He never likes to spend much time anywhere away from Mar-a-Lago, or even away in the United States. He'll go to a rally in another part of the country, get back on the plane, and dip. So joining us to discuss the future of the Catholic Church and the prospects for who might be considered to replace Pope Francis is Timothy J. Gordon. He's a Catholic philosopher, author, and podcaster. His show is called Rules for Retrogrades. It's on YouTube and anywhere else where podcasts are syndicated. His latest book is The Case for Patriarchy, and that is out now. Timothy, thanks so much for joining us here on the TMI show.
Thanks for having me here on TMI. Great to be here.
Good to have you. So let's talk about the process a little bit. The process for at this stage is that after the funeral, the cardinals will meet to plan their papal conclave and talk about general issues in the church, which obviously there's going to be some overlap. There's a Venn diagram there about, the church faces this issue and that issue, and obviously which pope, which cardinal might be a good person to deal with those issues. You need at least 80 eligible cardinals to form a conclave. You need a maximum of 120. They get together in the Sistine Chapel underneath those very famous, Michelangelo paintings. Then there's all the cardinals swear not to say. They swear confidentiality. They're secluded. They're not allowed to talk to anybody. No cell phones, presumably. They have 2 ballots each morning, 2 ballots in the afternoon until they achieve a winner. And sometimes it's pretty quick. Sometimes it's not. You need a 2/3 majority. Once you have a 2/3 majority, that's done. Each cardinal writes the name of the person that they're voting for. There's all sorts of little side conferences as people make the case for this person or that person. They fold their paper ballot, drop it into an urn, then someone counts them up. And so every time that there's a vote, the results are announced with white smoke or black smoke. Black smoke means we're short of 2/3. White smoke means we have an election. But then that's not really it completely. The candidate still has to accept if willing, although in recent decades, they always kind of have accepted. The most reluctant was Benedict in recent years. He was kind of like, I think I'm too old to do this, and that proved to be true. And then ultimately, Habemus Papam, which is Church Latin for we have a pope, is declared from the balcony of St. Peter's and the new pope is brought out and introduced to a massive crowd of tens of thousands of people. And then the new pope celebrates the mass and that pontificate begins. That's the process. We have, according to news events, we have news reports. The top contender is Pietro Parolin. He's Italian. He's the Secretary of State of the Vatican. He's 70 years old.
Hold on, Ted. Let's let Tim weigh in here on who he thinks the top contenders are. I mean, and fill us in if we got the process wrong, if we missed anything. As we're looking right here at live images of people paying their last respects to Pope Francis, and of course we'll get into his legacy and everything a little bit later on.
Yeah, the most important thing I think going forward is usually determining papabilissimi, the most popable candidate of all, is really, really difficult because it's not quite like electoral politics that we're used to in the West. There's often, sometimes, as in the case of the 2005 conclave, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger was the presumptive candidate. He'd been the doctrinal number 2 under John Paul II for 25 years. And especially his enemies, but also his friends, knew that he was the presumptive candidate. Other times, though, as in 2013, only some of the cardinals themselves know who they really want to go for, and it's a secret. In 2013, for instance, at that conclave, which gave us Pope Francis, this little-known Bergoglio, it turns out had actually been, though this wasn't disclosed to the public, had been the number 2 candidate in the 2005 conclave. But most people in their kind of dunderheads, because the church has been in auto demolition mode. This conclave will tell us what we've been wanting to know for the last 60 years, and we've seen that the culmination of the spirit of Vatican II, the leftism, the progressivism, the modernism, which did culminate with Francis, has it run its course? Do we need to invariably turn back to the right?
Well, so Tim, is it the, even if it was fake, was it the popularity of Pope Francis, you think, that drove more people back to Catholicism than before? Because there had been a long dip of people leaving the church, leaving the faith, and then we saw during his tenure that there was a sudden rise. Or are these people coming in and actually looking for a more traditional John Paul II type church? I mean, what was it? Because we did see a new rise in Catholicism in recent years.
Yeah, that rise began in 2019, 2020, 2021, and it actually evidences quite the opposite. Not a because of Francis's goodness draw or appeal to the church, but rather a sort of post-Francis draw or appeal to true traditionalism. And one of the mistakes we can make is to associate traditionalism with John Paul II. He's one of the guys that really helped enthusiastically kill the true mass, the Tridentine Latin mass. What the numbers show is that the current reawakening that's happening in America with our leaders, sports stars, Hollywood stars, and diocese to diocese, just common people, we are seeing record numbers of converts, especially this Easter. It's people wanting to connect with the Tridentine Latin Mass, the true Mass of the Latin Rite, for the better part of 2 millennia that the radicals really tried to kill, starting in 1970, following upon the close of Vatican II in 1965. People are coming into the church and they want to go to Latin Mass. Francis had, through the second half of his pontificate, declared war on the Latin Mass. In summer of 2020, he promulgated the document called Traditionis Custodes, where he's thumbing the eye of the people that come into the Latin Mass, because boomers and greatest gen era Catholics are really the ones that hated it. They declared ex cathedra, if you will, that young people could never like this old stodgy Latin Mass, and they came up with this really corny sort of Beatles, Monkees music, Novus Ordo Mass that most of us grew up with in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And it's terrible, and it drove people away from the faith. There's an old saying in the church that goes back almost 2,000 years, lex orandi, lex credendi, which means the way that you pray is the way that you believe. So when we have these clown masses with altar girls and without an altar, they stripped most of the altars out of the churches. They gave us Protestant Cranmer tables. They turned the priest around so he's facing the congregation when he consecrates the Eucharist. All this silly stuff that does not go back to the apostles the way the Latin Mass does. People stop believing. And that's what Vatican II caused.
Let me ask you, I mean, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but, you know, so I've attended churches where they offered Latin Mass, and certainly, you know, it was on offer. You say everybody wanted the Latin Mass, but I mean, the numbers show, I mean, in most American parishes where Latin Mass is an option, it's not the majority. It's far from the majority attendance, right? More people go to the English language. I mean, I think the argument against the Latin Mass is that, like, people don't, you know, I took 4 years of Latin. I like Latin, but I mean, and I think the Latin Mass is cool and it should be offered, but I don't understand, like, but, you know, I do take the point of people who don't speak Latin and they're just saying words and syllables. They're pronouncing syllables. They don't know their meaning. I mean, is that truly worship if you don't understand what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's the ecclesiastical Latin is the language of the church. We're not really supposed to have Mass said in the vernacular. What you're referring to, because it's been outlawed essentially again since 2020, is the Novus Ordo in Latin, which is very corny. What really matters is going back to the old missal, which means the old liturgical forms that's associated with, of course, before Latin II, the Mass wasn't said in the vernacular. This is preposterous. You use the language of the church, and the prayers are as obvious. You know, people grew up and knew the prayers of the Mass.
Yeah, my mom was one of them.
By second grade, so you don't by any means have to speak it. But yeah, you're talking about saying the Novus Ordo in Latin, which is absurd. Now, I'm talking about the form of the Missal, which was, whether we're talking about the 1960 Missal or the ones before that even, that have been moderately changed ever since the Council of Trent. That's really what matters, is the old Mass, which is beautiful. And no, the numbers don't show that at all. Francis issued several documents in 18, 19, 20, where he was questioning, why are all the young people in America, France, and even in Italy, why are all of the young people attending the TLMs where they're offered? His predecessor, Benedict XVI, in 2007, had circulated a document called Summorum Pontificum, which made the Latin Mass sayable again. I mean, the Tridentine form, not the Latin Mass not saying the Novus Ordo, the new Mass in Latin. That's corny. No one wants to go to that. And after 2007, until Francis had to essentially block it, which broke Benedict's heart. He was still alive at the time that Francis was talking about undoing Summorum Pontificum. People were converting in droves. So all the numbers show that the tradition is really what young people were connecting with. I used to go to the Latin Mass in Orange County, California, in Los Angeles, in the Valley. We go to one now that's still on offer in New Orleans, and it's just full of young families, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 kids to 30-year-old couples having families. You go to the Novus Ordo, and it's just some corny boomers, you know, with their 1.7 kids and their wannabe Beatles music and their Cranmer tables, and it's dying, it's dead. And Francis and those like him are bitter about this because they really thought they had, maybe it was in good faith, maybe it was in bad faith, they thought they had the solutions. They thought modernism was it. They thought changing with the world was it. Let's have this sort of crappy wannabe Protestantism, and it failed. It died. And now, you know, the original rationale for making the change, it will bring more people in. Well, numbers just plummeted after Vatican II. In the 70s, Pope Paul VI released the new missal in December of 69, and immediately in the next 6 months, Mass attendance drops off violently. Also, belief in the real presence of the Eucharist, you know, that little consecrated host being Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity, the whole center of Christianity and Roman Catholic faith dropped off to only between 10 and 20 people, depending on the survey, believe in it because of the new mass. So it's really, really important. This is not just about the language. This is about the missal and the liturgical forms that are happening. Is the priest facing the people, or is he facing where he's supposed to be? He's supposed to turn his back on the people as he consecrates those. Things like that are really, really important. And seems they knew what they were doing at Vatican II. And this is important today and this week and next week, because I'm arguing Francis made what happened at the council between 1962 and 1965 undeniable. It was undeniably bad. He was the apotheosis of the spirit of Vatican II. And now even center-left cardinals are saying, I guess we need to go back to true tradition, for much further than John Paul II, who was really a big fan of the council. He was kind of a conservative modernist. We need to actually go back. What this conclave is going to tell us is this hot air? Is it more bluster? Are they trying to still run interference for keeping the failed program of Vatican II going? Or do we actually need to go back to real Catholicism?
So, I mean, my general take has been that liberal popes tend to increase membership, church participation in the global South, and whereas conservative popes are better tend to increase membership in Europe and in the United States, in the West, and kind of like the secularization is the big challenge, right, for the Catholic Church and for Christianity writ large. And society is just becoming more secular, and there isn't a magic bullet, right? It's not choosing it's not like there is a pope who can solve this problem. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, but if I am right, what is the answer to growing the church as opposed to trying to just staunch the bleeding?
With all due respect, I do think you're wrong. There are several, premises of normism informing your assumptions there. So it's difficult to address three or four at once. But when you say the global South, for instance, if we take the first synod operated under Francis, the Extraordinary Family Synod in October of 2014, the Ordinary Synod of Francis in October of 2015. They're twin synods, his first ones. This is where Francis wanted to do that thing that the group of subversives called the Sancta Gallen Mafia had put him there to do. Four things. The first thing was to give communion to adulterers, divorced and civilly remarried. And he accomplished that there between the October 2014 and October 2015 synod. Well, it was correctly, widely held that it was the African bishops at those two synods that saved the church, that made it impossible for Francis and the Europeans to do what they wanted to do, led by Cardinal Sarah and other heroes in the African church. These guys still don't have girl altar boys, which is a preposterous thing. And the girl altar boys is just readying the way for female priests, which is also what this Sancta Gallen Mafia wants to do. Yeah. Yeah, so that's one example. No, it's actually the global South. If you count Africa and certain parts of Asia, Philippines, that are really, really faithful. They just want tradition. They don't understand the kind of change that's coming from the West. But even in the West, I'm citing it's really the people, what they actually want, if we're assessing this as vox populi. Young people want tradition as well. Everyone does, because it's truth. It's people want religion to be a religion. They don't want religion to act like some surrogate for a moralistic therapeutic deism. That's failed, that project in the West. So whether we're talking about the leadership in the global South is very traditional and wants tradition, the lay in the West and all over the world wants tradition. They want religion to be religion. When you get a hamburger, you want it to be a hamburger. You don't want it to be made of vegetables or something that's gross. Well, he's one of the Dubia cardinals. He's a very, very prayerful man. And he was always communion to divorcees who are remarried. Because if you're remarried, that's adultery. You can't go to confession for it. It's kind of simple. If you're divorced, that's a one-time sin. If you're not remarried, you can go to confession and then you can go back to communion and receive the sacrament. But this is a major question. How can a an unrepentant adulterer go and make a valid confession? They can't. So they've been barred from communion for 2,000 years. This is why if you get divorced, stay divorced, don't get remarried, Catholics. But so they asked this series of 5 questions called the Dubia process. It's very old. Francis was enraged. This is really what I referred to earlier when the mask came off. This was happening between 2016 and 2018. He was just enraged at one point at dinner, or right after this, all of this had gone down, where he'd received the Dubia from Cardinals Sarah and Cardinal Burke. He passed out for 9 minutes at dinner. They thought he was dead. He was red in the face. He said, "I'll have their hats." Cardinal Burke had been the prefect for the Apostolic Signatura, the High Court. He was the Grand Inquisitor. He didn't take his red hat. He remained a cardinal, but he demoted him from that position. Cardinal Sarah was the prefect for the Congregation of Divine Worship. He got rid of him, demoted him. So these are 2 of the 3 best cardinals who are technically papabile. Burke is especially probably disfavored, as he's seen as the leader of the rabble rousers, as you call them. So yes, you're correct there. But Sarah is they're both prayerful, holy men. They're probably the 2 holiest men in the College of Cardinals. But Sarah is seen as, he said even less. He just signed the Dubia. And I think there's more hope for him. The problem is they're both old. And we need a good, true traditionalist. For the first time since the Second Vatican Council, we were told Benedict XVI, he had some love for the Latin Mass, but he was still kind of a modernist in a lot of ways that aren't typically recognized. We need a true traditionalist, and we need a young one, which shouldn't be that hard to do. The hard part is going to be getting any of these guys the job, and we don't know how likely that is. But I hope for Cardinal Sarah. I hope against hope.
Yeah, I pulled up the website that you mentioned here. It's on screen. What about the Filipino Cardinal Tagle?
Tagle, yeah. Tagle is he was sort of made in the image of Pope Francis. He's seen as a strong leftist. He has the site lists him as sort of a moderate leftist, but he's a strong leftist. He's sort of Asian Pope Francis. He'd be really bad news, which is not representative of the Philippines, because, like one of you guys said, the Philippines is typically quite faithful.
Very Catholic. They don't allow divorce in their country. It's still outlawed.
Oh no, very based.
I'm wondering though. Look, a more conservative church is going to be a smaller church, right? In the United States, for example, 28% of Catholics are divorced. So if you say, well, you guys have to never have love again in the rest of your life, or you're going to be excommunicated. And look, cards on the table. That was my mom. My mom got divorced and in the early 60s. And then she was briefly excommunicated for a few years. She was extremely devout. It was extremely upsetting to her. She didn't want to get divorced, but ultimately, she never remarried. But ultimately, she was, due to Vatican II, she was readmitted, and she was devout the rest of her life. I guess the point is, if we don't have statistics for global Catholics for the divorce rate, but if you lose 28% of American Catholics, or let's say half of them get remarried and 14% are just gone because they're adulterers, then, the church is going to be, is it okay with you if the church is just more conservative but smaller?
Well, let's frame this properly. Jesus said in 2 of the 4 Gospels, that 2 of them were synoptic Gospels, if you divorce your wife and you remarry another, you're committing adultery, right? So he said this. So it sounds like you might think Jesus is wrong. I don't. He also said to the apostles,
I just think Jesus lived 2,000 years ago.
When you go to one town and you bring the gospel, if the people don't hear you, shake the dust from your sandal and go to the next town. You don't modify the gospel to accommodate murderers, whores, adulterers, thieves, right? You bring the gospel to them and you say, here it is. This is it. This is the truth. This is your way out of jail. This is your get out of jail free card. So what the church declares as a matter of just truth, simple, straightforward truth, is that once you get married, if it's a valid marriage, maybe we can talk about annulment in a second.
Right.
But if it was a valid marriage, it doesn't matter, that you have a crush on the Time to Make the Donuts guy on TV, and now you want to get married to him.
What if your spouse is beating you?
Absolutely set.
But what if your spouse beats you?
Set, if you want to find love again, you have love, right? You go back to your husband or wife, you live with them, and it's also a misconception. No one's ever been excommunicated for divorce. That simply doesn't happen. Yeah, then Vatican II didn't correct that because that never happened.
My mom got married outside of the church, so she married a Protestant, and then so I think they excommunicated her for that. And then
you don't get excommunicated for marrying a Protestant. It's just that's
what she told me. I don't know. I was like, a little kid, a wee one. But I mean,
like everyone's parents also. I mean, it's everyone's parents, everyone's grandparents from that era did so. But to get back to your question, you bring the true gospel. There's a million false iterations of the true gospel that's called by St. Paul in the Bible itself, the false gospel. So the main thing is you bring the true gospel to as many people want it. And young people nowadays are crying out for it. And like I said, just Francis and those like him were absolutely angry that their kind of normie narrative, the one you're sort of reiterating here, it's not true. People,
by the way, I'm totally stealing that for other political stuff. I like that normieism. I do have to say, though, I mean, the thing about Catholicism, one of the things that makes it unique and sets it aside from, say, Islam after the end of the Caliphate, is that it has a governing political body that adjudicates and can modernize the church and has made it more adaptable. And one of the reasons that it's been successful for 2,000 years, if we're going to be frozen in time to Christ's time 2,000 years ago, do we need a church at all? Right? I mean, maybe we can just say we just go with OG gospel. We follow that literally. We don't need bishops, cardinals, collection plate, the whole 9 yards. It just seems like, what is the purpose of this, of the Vatican, of the governing hierarchy of the church, which is basically like a country? If you're not going to modernize,
if it were a country,
are you suggesting?
If it were a country, guys, it would be right up there with like China and India in terms of population. We're talking about 1.3 billion people that identify in the world as Catholic. It kind of used
to be a country.
It literally could be one of the biggest countries in the world if you count the Catholic diaspora around the world, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest landowners of property all around the world as the Roman Catholic Church goes, right? We're talking about a very powerful and very far-reaching institution,
a political entity.
But you seem to be suggesting, when you refer to the OG gospel and the purpose of the church's magisterium to adapt it with the times, this is exactly the opposite of the purpose of the Holy Magisterium, is to preserve something called the depositum fidei, the deposit of faith, which is together. Scripture needs to remain untouched, and the capital T tradition, the church's teaching that came down directly from the apostles to the patristic teachers in the first 350 years of the church, to preserve it so it wouldn't change. So you're talking about something.
Well, they're not doing a very good job because it's been changing for thousands of years.
And it needs to be adapted and amended. This is absolutely wrong. The purpose of the magisterium, if you go home and get your Denzinger, I'm sure you have a copy. The whole purpose of all of this in Denzinger and all of the papal teachings on Scripture is to enliven them and to give the proper interpretation that doesn't change through time. So when you talk about the OG gospel, let's go back to Jesus saying once for all, he's speaking both as a precept of the eternal law and the natural law, meaning this can never change. Once you take a wife or a husband in the view of heaven, that's set. And I know that's unpopular, and people want to go marry their new crushes or whatever, second, third, fourth.
Or they want to leave their abusive spouse.
And we have Protestantism for that. You can go to any church. You know, that's why you have English Protestantism. If you want to contradict the truth, and you want someone to tell you that this shit is shinola or whatever, then you go be a Protestant. But if you want the truth and you want to say, hey, I know, you know, your husband got a little bit tubby. I understand your wife got a little bit.
That's not what it is.
You got to go back to your spouse, though, man. That's Catholicism. It's the value, the beauty of truth. Protestantism's for telling people shit is shinola.
I'm divorced. I didn't want to be. I hate it. I wanted, my wife was abusive. What can I say? And she was abusing our son. I'm not going back to her. Sorry,
Yeah, we're just talking about Catholicism here. We're just rapping.
Yeah, no, we are just rapping. I know. I'm just saying, like, it's. But
just
I mean, it's like I do think it's like.
Like I said, you're good if you're Catholic. You can be divorced. You could be separated, particularly if you're in an abusive situation. You just can't get remarried. Right? I mean, that's really not Catholicism. Simpliciter. That's just what Jesus says in Matthew's gospel. He says, if you divorce your wife and you take another, that's adultery. So even sola scriptura Protestants, when they're being honest, they acknowledge as much. So, and that's the beauty of truth, is that it's unchanging. Well, it doesn't change from generation to generation.
So Manila's been putting up all the history of the church in like shorthand in our background. I'm sure you see it on the screen here, and like you just look at that and you're like, there's the history. It's changing. The Catholic Church has been an ever-evolving, changing institution, responding to massive political changes, cultural changes, shifts in society, and not just in the past 100 years, right? Over the course of its entire history, the Catholic Church.
You're talking about the personnel. When we look, the bishops of the church, they don't live forever. So what you're saying is an absurdism. That because the bishops die, and each bishop of every diocese and archdiocese stands in the shoes of one of the apostles. We can tell you where they are. The bishops live about 75 years, because that's what a man's average life expectancy is. Sure. Because he's replaced by a new bishop who stands in the same shoes that he did. The Bishop of Rome stands in the shoes of Peter. That doesn't mean that the church's irreformable dogma changes. The whole point of having these guys, which you've squarely missed, is that they are the protectors, the traditionis custodes, the Francis's turn of phrase that's supposed to be ironic, the guardians of tradition. It's not allowed to change. So irreformable doctrine is the purpose of it all, the deposit of faith. You've completely missed it. The church doesn't change. The personnel change. Maybe the buildings do, but you thought, and a lot of people were fooled by this modernist lie, that because the paint chips off on a new building and they have to do a new paint job or something, that the irreformable doctrine can be overturned. Oh, now, modern day Jesus would say divorce is okay. No, it's irreformable if it's a dogma. And that's why we have the difference between changing discipline, like priests don't necessarily have to wear their hair in the tonsure anymore. That's called a discipline. And irreformable doctrine, the teachings of the church cannot be reformed. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point of having a church. It's literally what Christ said to the apostles at the Last Supper. What you bind here on earth is bound, and what you loose here on earth is loosed. He's not only telling them that they can hear confessions, he's telling them, I've brought you the truth, capital T, and it's not allowed to change. The Holy Spirit, this is when he announced the Holy Spirit was at the Last Supper. He's going to be here to oversee you, to make sure that you don't make errors. So it's an inerrant tradition and inerrant scripture. Together they make the deposit of faith. And that's the whole point of having conclaves and popes and archbishops and bishops, is they're just there to make sure that it doesn't change, even if the men and the buildings and the hairstyles do.
Yeah, I mean, take yourself for example. You're a young guy, you got this cool hip rocker look, but it really betrays your values as like a very serious Catholic and philosopher, and what people would think you would be one of these rock and roll, like, let's play some music in church that's not, a homily of any sort, right? Like, that's what they would think when they're looking at you, but really you're sticking true to the dogma, and your core values are your core values. And I think that's kind of what you're saying here, right? I mean, don't be fooled by the packaging.
Absolutely. I mean, the church is there for life. I mean, everything's true there except for the fact that I'm young. I wish you were right about that. I mean, I'm 44, but the people.
Tim, we are young. Stop it. How dare
Okay,
you?
fine. We'll go with one more palliable lie. Yeah, 44 is very young. Sure. I wish I were 34, but the point is,
we're half the age of Francis.
If you look at the average age, size of family of people entering the church now versus the 80s and 90s when we were growing up, it's huge. It's humongous. And I'm a good example because Francis said he's getting rid of the Latin Mass, to go back to that, because he doesn't want us to be bi-ritual. A lot of people don't know this, but we have 21 different rites in the church. And those rites, the Roman rites, 99% of the masses that we know, everything we're arguing about is the Roman rite. But there are all these minor rites that were allowed to keep certain groups from leaving the church in, like, the Great Western Schism. The point is, young people, real young people, not people like me, but they actually really, really, really connect with the traditions, not just the old Mass, but the traditions that go along with it. And the traditions of, it's a moral imperative, not contracepting, staying married, having big families. This is what the laity are called to do, 10, 11, 12, 13 kids. I don't see that because I live about an hour and a half away from New Orleans. When I go to the Novus Ordo Mass, 90 seconds from my front door here in South Mississippi, because I don't have a TLM closer than New Orleans.
That's a beautiful church there in the French Quarter, by the way.
Beautiful. Yeah, St. Pat's is 200 years old. But I see the typical boomer families with 1.7 kids. They contracepted for 40 years, which contradicts the entire point of the lay vocation, is to have big families. They're kind of just there clapping along, listening to their crappy Beatles music, and they're tuned out, and they don't know shit about the faith. They don't know anything. You could literally start doing, you could start doing like a Buddhist chant in the middle of Mass, and they wouldn't know the difference because, one, they don't know shit, and because, two, the priests give them shit every week at Mass. They wouldn't know the difference. When I go once a month to the TLM in New Orleans, it's families with 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 kids. They know the Latin, they know everything there, and they're very engaged, and they're chanting the Pange Lingua, written by Thomas himself, and it's in this big, beautiful church with, oh my gosh, with an altar. They actually stripped all the altars out of these Novus Ordo churches. It's just such a stark difference. And if I could take you two to Mass with me at my Novus Ordo one week, and then take you to New Orleans' beautiful old church, St. Pat's, over 200 years old, right near the quarter, like you said. The next week, you would see that this is not a matter of taste. It's another solecism of modernism, just an error. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. It's very objective. Anyone with half a brain would want the latter. And no one could possibly want this form of non-worship worship. It's not worship. You just go, and everyone's dead-eyed suburbanites and boomers, and everyone's been married 3 times, and no one believes in the gospel. And the Eucharist, the body of our Lord himself, body, blood, soul, divinity, is handled like a turd, and women are passing it out at the altars, not the priests. And people are handling it with their dirty hands, and they ripped out the altar rail. It's just shit. And everyone's sick of it. And young people are like, just give me the real thing, man. Do you like new Coke or do you like old Coke? It's an obvious choice. It's not a matter of taste. It's objective. People want, if they're going to be Christian, they want the real deal.
Well, I mean, but we didn't. I would like, before we do, we're running low on time, and thank you so much for coming on. Yeah. I do want to get like your answer though to the practical concern of, which I think is valid. If you're worshiping and listening to a service in a language that you don't speak, you don't understand, then are you spiritually present for to receive God's message and to are you really there? Is it like, do you, are you, Catholicism recognizes that, yes, you're baptized as a baby, but you're not really a full-fledged, you can't take communion until you're confirmed, and you're confirmed at the age of reason, where you have free will and you accept God so you're not just inheriting Catholicism from your family, you're making a choice, right, to participate in this ritual, in this religion. It's like, so consciousness is important. Are you conscious fully if you're worshiping in a language that you don't speak or understand?
Yes, you are. And there's another, so I mean, it's true that we used to be confirmed at baptism. Nowadays, I mean, I have 7 kids. 2 of them are going through it right now. They're confirmed around 15, which is too late.
It's getting later and later.
But
Yeah.
I was confirmed, I think, at 11.
Confession at the age of reason, which is 2nd grade. So nowadays they get confirmed afterwards. But the rub of it is that I'll reverse the question on you. There's one official language of the church. It's important that it's a dead language in all other respects. Ecclesiastical Latin, which I teach my kids starting when they're in 3rd grade. And they all love it. They go through it, and it's easy enough to learn. But going to Mass, where you're hearing the parts of the Mass in ecclesiastical Latin, and the prayer, which you can teach the most, you can teach a kindergartner, Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. I mean, they know.
Well, someone who speaks a Romance language, but what about a Catholic who speaks Burmese, for example?
You're missing the point, though. Again, it's about the church has a language. So I would say, yes, if you're hearing the Mass or you're hearing prayers outside of the language of the church, which is very, very, very easy to catechize, and the church just chose to stop doing this at Vatican II, are they really present? And I'm friends with the, Pope Donald Trump's sort of chosen exorcist, Father Chad Ripperger, and he says, who deals directly with the devil and demons, and he says outright, he hangs out at Mar-a-Lago all the time. Prayers not in Latin aren't as effective. The demons hate the Latin far more. I mean, you can take it directly from the horse's mouth. The language of the one true church, the one church instituted by Christ and the disciples, was a Latin language church. Ecclesiastical Latin is the official language of the church. Even under Francis's pontificate, the documents are promulgated in Latin, my friend. And so I think your point cuts one way, and the one way favors what I'm saying. If you're praying in Tagalog or English or whatever, then it's not as effective as praying in the direct language of the church, which again is very, very easy to catechize. And I teach my kids at home, and it's really, really very simple matter. Americans struggle with language, and this is just silly. You just start teaching Latin in kindergarten, and the kids will understand it very soon. But you're right.
Of course, Jesus did not speak Latin.
Vernacular, it's not as effective.
Jesus didn't speak Latin.
You to hear that?
Jesus spoke Greek, right, and Aramaic, and Hebrew.
Spoke Latin and Aramaic, and some people think Greek, but Jesus spoke Latin when he was in Rome. What do you think he was speaking to Pontius Pilate? He was speaking Latin. That doesn't matter. Because of the action of the Holy Spirit, Jesus also didn't institute the exact Mass. He instituted the part of the Mass we associate with the consecration. But the Mass was instituted by the apostles. It's an apostolic tradition.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, well, of course. So that has been in Latin since time immemorial. And again, the language isn't even the most important part to me. What's important to people are that the forms go all the way back to something older than just 1969. And that's really what people connect with. And hopefully, I've evidenced it for you in a lot of ways, but you have it from the horse's mouth, Father Chad Ripperger. Like,
I want to do a deep dive on the exorcism. I'm fascinated by exorcisms, actually. So and I would love to have you back just to talk about that.
Yeah, that is super fascinating. Yeah, some people might call it the occult, but
No, it's
you
a
know,
legit.
the
It's
whole-
a legitimate thing in Catholicism.
I know that.
A guy
I
came to
know.
speak at my church about it, and he even had a film. It was crazy.
Well, one last thing before we let you go. With the death of Pope Francis, that kind of bumped the canonization of Carlo Acutis. I guess he was a millennial. He was like 15 years old when he died from leukemia. But he was due to be canonized this weekend. What happens there for that kid? It's bumped, so it's suspended for now. When will that happen for Carlo to become Saint Carlo Acutis, now that the Pope's funeral services are taking place this weekend instead?
Presumably it'll happen under, probably in the first weeks of the next pontificate, whatever that is. It's part of immemorial tradition that they do nothing administrative in this interregnum. But he's already been beatified, and he's already been had the second step after beatification associated with canonization confirmed. So we don't have the same process anymore where we have a devil's advocate arguing against proper canonization, but he's already received the marks of canonization. He's already been confirmed as having 2 miracles associated with him. So it's bound to happen. It'll just be under the next pontificate. It's just part of the tradition, I guess, that they don't do anything administrative in between pontificates.
Okay, well that makes sense. I know a lot of people were waiting for
hold.
that as well.
Yeah,
everything's paused until we see the white smoke. Which
Yeah.
how long do you think that's going to take?
I'm really curious. I'm going to be watching
You
really
had to guess?
closely. Sorry.
If you had to guess, what would you say? A couple weeks from now? Like, would it take a couple weeks?
I would think this one might be really fast, because everything I'm hearing out of Rome is that even the leftist cardinals were so oppressed by the autocratic Pope Francis that they're all looking for the same thing. This is what Cardinal Timothy Dolan, who's a center leftist Cardinal Archbishop of New York, said the other day. So if it's not bluster, then it should be reasonably fast, and we should see someone that would be favorable to someone like me. And I would hope this would be a very short conclave. We don't know the exact date, do we, that they go into conclave, but it'll probably be late next week or early the week after that. And I wouldn't expect a long conclave. I'm not. If it's bluster and they're all just saying this and they want to give us another Lavender Mafia, Sankt Gallen Mafia type of pope, then it might also be short. Yeah, I'm expecting a short conclave.
Wow.
Either way.
Okay, so yeah, a lot of stuff happening and moving within the Catholic Church. A lot of all eyes on Rome. Apparently, I'm personally offended that Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed that he wants to use this opportunity to go approach Donald Trump at a funeral service.
Oof.
The guy's the douchebag. That's what he does.
What like seriously, like
when he goes to the White House, he's a douche.
Seriously, like really, you're going to go accost President Trump at the Pope's funeral?
It's not the time or the place. And if you do it, you shouldn't be letting anyone know. At least it should be very discreet,
Zelensky has broadcasted that he's going to, and he's told Giorgia Meloni, who is, kind of the effectively the host state leader, that that's his intention. And, if I were the Secret Service, I would be, stop right there. You're not coming close to President Trump. This is not the time or place. Goodbye, dude. Like,
it's shocking. It's shocking he gets there. It's shocking they let him through with that little Decepticons tracksuit that he wore to the White House. He had the little Decepticons thing. I was like, that's the coolest thing about him. But he apparently doesn't own any 3-piece suits.
No, his wife has all the shopping duties. She gets to go shopping at Chanel and all that stuff, and, like along the Champs-Elysees. So, it's not him. He dresses in kind of like a like the way Steve Jobs used to dress, right? There was like kind of a uniform that Steve Jobs always wore.
Yeah.
Same type of thing.
Steve Jobs probably owned a suit or two. I mean, I'm not an overdresser, but I'll podcast in, a thermal or something. But if you go to the White House or you go to a state funeral, the funeral
Oh my
for
gosh.
the Holy Roman Pontiff, get dressed. We're going to be watching.
Oh, wow.
Wear that.
I wonder, that's a good point. I wonder if Volodymyr Zelensky is actually going to put on a suit to pay his respects at, for the funeral.
He'd better.
Holy moly. I didn't even think about that.
No, I'm sure. I have little faith in him, but I suspect he will do the right thing.
I don't. I think there's enough douchebaggery in that guy that he thinks he's a
that's
demigod.
so over the top. It's so ridiculous.
I think
that would be more over the top than wearing what he with the Decepticon.
The Oval Office was really bad, but still, this is at a whole different level.
Yeah, well, I guess that is reason to tune in tomorrow if at 4:00 in the morning for us, Ted, just to see if Zelensky, and then you could fall back asleep because it's 4 in the morning for us.
No, I don't even want to. It would mean that that society has become so depraved that we might as well just hang it up.
Like what? Yeah, that's that.
I mean, especially because if he does that, people will make excuses for him too.
Well, like I said, it's demagoguery. This guy thinks he's a demigod, and it's gross. It's gross. It's gross what he's done to the whole, Christian faith in Ukraine.
Well, that's true. He banned an entire church.
All of it. All of it's just disgusting. It's gross. So what are you gonna do? So we'll see. We'll see if he shows up tomorrow, and I kind of hope the Secret Service is denied, no entry.
That could happen.
That'd be hilarious. All right. We'll leave you be. Timothy J. Gordon, thank you so much.
Tim.
You guys can check out Tim's podcast. It's called Rules for Retrogrades. It can be found on YouTube, anywhere that podcasts are syndicated. His latest book, The Case for Patriarchy, is out, along with a series of other books that we had on screen already. And I'll put up your website here. See more there at timothyjgordon.com. Thank you so much, Tim. Always a pleasure to hear your insights because you're obviously very well versed.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, happy Easter to you both.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. Happy Easter. Bye-bye.